I've just pulled a few kind of general things about pork exports and trade, and some of them are from this morning that I thought we'd just run through in a little more detail here, and then some longer term things to look at. This is the chart that I showed this morning of the U.S. of the dollar index. Now, a lot of people, this is a pretty good barometer of the dollar. If you look at the Foreign Ag Service and others, you'll hear a term called trade-weighted dollar value. And that's probably the most appropriate one because it takes the weight of our different trade partners, what we trade with them, and weights their currency into a measure of the dollar according to our volume of trade with them. And there's one for the economy in general, and there's an ag trade-weighted trade-weighted dollar as well. This one is not that, okay? And the reason I put it up here is we ought to talk about what this one is. This one's about 47%, I believe it is, the euro. It's another 20% the yen. It's got some others in there, the Canadian dollar, the Brazilian real, at about 10% apiece. It's got the Swiss franc in there at like 5%. You know, we trade a lot with the Swiss franc, with the Swiss. But all that cheese, I guess. But anyway, so it's a measure of the dollar, but you always have to remember it's kind of a euro trade. It's kind of a euro exchange rate. And so when the euro changes, this thing moves quite a bit, and we have to appreciate it for that. It's still the one that's traded every day. It's published every day. It's easy to access, and so for that reason, it gets used a lot as just a measure of the value of the dollar. And you can see one of the things, the characteristics about this was this tremendous strengthening in 14 and 15, mainly because of the euro. I mean, and the interest of the European Union. This was at the time when we started seeing negative interest rates in the European Union, and you wanted to hold anything except European debt. And so they started buying dollars, and it pushed the dollar higher. But we've been in this trading range for a couple of years, and when we traded out of this range right after the election, or right around the election time last year, that was when, that was very logical. I mean, all the things that were happening, as I pointed out this morning, said that the dollar would probably get stronger. And it was I was kind of sitting here going, oh man, if our technical analysis is right, when you break out of this trade, this channel, you should go the width of the channel higher, and that would have put us up here at around 110 or so. And I was kind of sweating bullets over that because as an export business, we'll talk about how much of that here in a minute. That would be a major stumbling block for our business. It turned around and did just the opposite. And again, there's not a real good economic explanation for that. We know that the Trump administration has ruffled political feathers on a lot of fronts, and a lot of it was in the European Union, and that's probably about the best explanation, and I'm not sure that's a good one. But I think it's also interesting that we stopped again when we got to the bottom of the trading range. And so that tells me that we're probably going to spend some time kind of where we've been, which we always need to remember that exchange rates cause really the biggest disruption when they're doing this, okay? Because when they're changing, they create incentives to either wait to buy something or wait to sell something or hurry to buy something or hurry to sell something, depending on which side of that trade you're on. But when they're bouncing around, there's none of that. Okay, it's going to bounce around a little bit, but it's not moving enough that I might wait to do something. So the timing impacts of volatility within this range are way different than volatility like we see in these other big moves over the last several years. So that's something to keep in mind when you think about this. When we look at individual currencies, of course, our direct customers are very important to us. In this case, we've got the Mexican peso, of course, which caused us some difficulties last year, but because of this rapid devaluation in the fall, I think it's clear that it created one of those timing things. Let's hurry up and buy something before the money in our pocket is worth less next week than it was this week. And there was some rush to do that in November and December. It's turned around now. There's more stability. It's more valuable, so there's more incentive to buy with it, but there's a little bit of stability there. The green, of course, is the Canadian dollar, and the Canadian dollar has caused some major disruptions in the U.S. business, not from the product standpoint, but from what it caused as far as the Canadian industry to do from an expansion standpoint back when the Canadian dollar got very, very weak very strong, pardon me, back at the end of the 90s, into the first part of the 2000s, and then, of course, encourage expansion in Canada as we went in here and the Canadian dollar weakened. The yen has gained value over the last 2 or 3 years, kind of a very gradual gain in that. The Korean won has been very stable, which is good because that's a growing market. And of course, the renminbi, the Chinese currency, is pegged to some point by government decision to the U.S. dollar. It's not a market-driven currency, and that's one of the long-term limitations for China. I mean, at some point, they probably have to join the world community economically from letting their currency value be determined by the marketplace. They've done that a little bit in the last few years. Most people think that their currency would gain some value if they would let it go. I've seen arguments just the opposite, that it would fall dramatically. So, but it's still an important one. The other one that's not shown on here would be you know, some of these are one of them. Canada is also one of our big competitors. Of course, the euro is an important one, and we watch the real pretty closely on the customer side. We talked about this growth in exports that we've seen this year, and of course a remarkable string of growth from the year 2000 until about 2012. The point I've made about this is if I showed you exports for beef, now of course beef exports went practically to zero right here in 2003 and then have come back, but they kind of stopped in 2012 and have moved sideways. They're going to be record large this year, but still not much growth. If I showed you the chicken graph, it would look exactly like this. And so in all cases for U.S. proteins, the golden years of growth were the 2000 through 2012, and since then it's been kind of flat. And we have not increased our exports at nearly the kind of rate we did during that time period. The weekly data we give, and I put this in here mainly to contrast it. This is monthly data. It's product weight data that is converted to carcass weight by the Economic Research Service. But that data comes from the Commerce Department. And it is actual products that are shipped during that month. They're reported back to Foreign Ag Service, who we get it from, and of course ERS converts it over to a carcass weight equivalent. These data are from the Commerce Department on a weekly basis. They're part of the same system that reports to us grain exports every week. And of course the grain export data dates itself back to the 1972 or 3, the Great Russian Grain Robbery. Most of you in here are too young to know about that. But there was a time when the Russians needed grain, and they came in and did separate deals with about 6 different grain merchandisers in the United States. And nobody knew that they were doing anything with anybody else. And when they consummated all the deals, they took enough grain that U.S. grain prices skyrocketed, and we said we're never going to let that happen again, and so we instituted an export reporting program so that the marketplace knew what was going on. I'm not sure it still does, but anyway, that's the theory behind it. A few years ago, we added beef and pork to that to that system, so that we have more of a real-time information source for exports. Now, the problem when we first started the pork export data, I think in 2013, I don't have the long-term chart up here, was that you could take the weekly data and add it up, and it never matched up to the monthly data. All right, I never got a good explanation for that. But the good news is that as it's kind of matured, the data are pretty indicative. They won't match perfectly, but if you see a 9% change in September and a 14% change in October of the weekly data, you're probably going to get a commensurate kind of change in the monthly data when it's published. In fact, this 9% change in the weekly data in September, it was 8.5% in the monthly data, something like that. So it's very close. We'll see what the October data says. But it's a point, I guess the reason I put it up here is if you're watching the market and want to watch a number that indicates weekly or kind of indicates current export data, this is probably the best one we have. Now, there's one other piece of export data that's published as part of mandatory price reporting, and it's in the pork reporting export sales report. And at the bottom of that, you'll see export loads. And it'll have the number of loads of product that were reported for export. There's only one problem with that. It doesn't include Canada and Mexico. Okay? So the export load data that comes from mandatory price reporting, and the reason it doesn't is that system was to get price reports in. And those loads represent prices of product going somewhere else because the product sent to Canada and Mexico is generally priced the same as it is in the United States. Okay? So we were trying to find out what's the differential pricing in price reporting. So we don't want to know the Canada and Mexico because we already know the price of that. That's the price in the United States. And so they just add those loads up and put them in. So it doesn't include Canada and Mexico if you use that load data. That's the reason I prefer these data as kind of a barometer. Yeah?
Do global companies have to report their own internal data or not?
Do global companies have to report their internal data? If they go outside the United States, yes, they do. Yeah, it's not that you have to sell it to somebody else. It's that it moves outside the country. So that's the criteria. Okay, I showed you this one this morning also. This is exports, monthly exports going back to 2008. Made the case that really the only growth market we've had is, from a volume standpoint, is Mexico. We still think that Korea could be a growth market. It's the red line that kind of goes up very much seasonally here. We've had some growth in Korea this year. Matter of fact, pretty healthy growth. And we think that that's going to be an important one longer term because we do have a free trade agreement there. We do have a process by which tariffs are going to be reduced over the next, they've already started 2 years worth. I think there's another 8 years for that to go before they get to the lowest point. And I don't believe they go to zero, but they're dramatically lower. This growth that we've seen on occasion, we saw it here, we see it again here to other markets. That's the ones not listed there. But I can tell you that it's driven by Australia, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Colombia, and Honduras. No secret, those are 5 countries that we've done free trade agreements with over the last 7 or 8 years, okay? And so, these things matter, and they matter. And the bilateral ones frequently are easier to do because you don't have just nearly as many balls in the air as you do on these big multilateral things. And so that's been our focus, except for the TPP, and hopefully that will be the focus now for the Trump administration going forward to get more of those done. But you notice that Russia isn't on there. They were one time one of our good customers. They haven't bought any product from the United States in about 3 years. Haven't bought any from Europe in about 3 years. Basically over when we told them that they were bad boys for going into Crimea. Okay, so they didn't like us helping them run their country, and so they quit buying our product. That, of course, caused a lot of displacement of product from the EU, which gave them an end to the Chinese business, which they built dramatic market share over the last 3 or 4 years. It's going to be hard to displace going forward, and that's one of the reasons I'm not one of the ones that's real optimistic about what happens with China. We've had these big surges. This was the Olympic surge. This was the Blue Year surge. We had one early year before last, basically mainly on exchange rate, but still, Lowell, I think China's been our next great market for 30 years, and probably going to be our next great market for the next 30 years. I'm not real optimistic there because I think they'll find ways to not do business. How important are exports? Well, this is from 79 to 2016, the last year we got data for. Total production would be the top, and we're up to close to 25 billion pounds of carcass weight. And notice that total production up 63% for over that time period. Total U.S. consumption only up 31%. So the growth of our business during that time period would have been half as large had we not had growth in exports. All right. How much is that? Well, we've got somewhere around 5 billion pounds here. If you take half of it, it's 2.5 billion. Okay, 2.5 billion, that's 12.5 million hogs. So somewhere around 12% of our growth would not have occurred without the growth in exports over this time period. And that's really the issue. There was a gentleman a few years ago that was involved with MPPC and the Pork Board, and we would argue that, well, we need to grow exports to have a chance to grow. And he said, I don't want to grow. I don't care if you grow, okay? And I said, well, that's not the universal thinking among people. There are some folks that want to grow their businesses and want to provide opportunities for newcomers and those kind of things. And he said, well, that's fine. Do that with somebody else's checkoff dollars. And I guess he had a point from a parochial standpoint. But still, that was the whole intent here, was to provide opportunities for growth. Exports now are about a little over 5 billion pounds in 2016, 5.2. We're going to grow that a bit this year. These projections forward come from the Livestock Marketing Information Center out in Denver. That's a cooperative group with the Growing Grant colleges that put these things together, and they've got about 4% growth the next couple of years. Of course, this year is going to beat that, as I've talked about this morning. But an enviable record that we have on this. Now, the reason it starts in 1994 is because that's when the NAFTA was signed. All right, and so it started a kind of a string of growth here that really has picked up, of course, as we got into the 2000s. If you put trade on an equal footing, by just about any measure, the United States pork industry is going to win in the pork business. Everybody says, well, who's got the lowest cost of production? And we kind of try to look at that all the time and compare those, but every time I've seen a legitimate compare and done, Canada, Brazil, the United States come up, you could throw a hat over all three of them, all right? And it kind of depends on what the exchange rate is at the moment. Back in the early 2000s, a large agricultural consultancy did a study that they were going to determine, where in the, who has the competitive advantage for raising pigs in the world, and they had this model of how they were going to do this, and they weren't going to try to estimate cost of production and so they did a scoring system, and after they went through all their scoring system, the answer was Canada. Canada was the best. And, of course, since then, the Canadian business has gotten smaller, and the U.S. business has just kind of charged on because they didn't fully appreciate the synergies of the production and the packing sectors in the two countries. It's not just production costs. One of our greatest sources of competitive advantage are these efficient packing plants that we have in the United States. I mean, nobody has plants like that. The only ones that do is Brandon, Manitoba, okay? One of the newest plant in Canada. No other country has the kind of packing plants that we have that are so efficient and have such high throughput levels. And they provide us a great source of competitive advantage in world markets. Now, if we had very high cost of production, they probably couldn't be good enough to overcome that. But the combination of efficient grain production in the United States, efficient production units on the pork industry, and efficient packing companies allow us to have a product, to deliver a product virtually anywhere in the world at lower cost than anybody else in the world can do it. And so, when it comes right down to it, even if you don't sell it at that lower price, you gain competitive advantage from the profits that you can get from that. If we look at this as a percentage of total production, it peaked out back here in 2012 at about 23.5%. We've kind of reduced that some since then. But it's growing again. Growing exports and growing production, though, both mean that your percentage exported may not increase quite as much as you would otherwise, but still up in the 20s, and we should stay there except for shocks to the system from here on. Of course, this surge in 2008 was one of the years where the Chinese were in our market in a big way. If we look at net exports, we import about 5% of production. And that varies some, generally with the exchange rate. A weaker dollar means we import less. A stronger dollar, we import more. But still, we import things that we have a niche here for. And one of the major ones, the best example of that is ribs. If you go to the European Union, you probably won't ever find any ribs to eat. They tend to not eat ribs. And we like ribs a lot, and it has a higher value for them to sell their ribs here. And so we import a lot of ribs from the European Union. There are some other cuts like that we import from those places. Our number one market, or our number one supplier of imported product is Canada. And they're also our number 3 export market. I don't know if it's supposed to work that way in economic theory, is it? I don't think it's supposed to do that, a two-way thing. But the truth is there are different products that flow back and forth, and there are products that flow up there for processing and come back here, and there's a lot of kind of interesting flows of that. But still, our net exports are predicted by LMIC to go up to about 4.7, 4.8 billion pounds here in the next few years. And that's the amount that's gone. I mean, that reduces our total availability here. The last one of these that I want to talk about, I think this is the last slide I have, and then we'll have some discussion, is we also have this trade in hogs. And during my career, and I think Mark Legan may have been on the board during part of this caused a lot of problems with us in Canada back a few years ago. We had dumping duties, and we had all kinds of trade cases, and it was not a good situation. And remember when I said a while ago that the Canadian dollar was a big product? When the Canadian dollar weakened here in the 2000s, what it meant was the Canadian hogs are priced off the U.S. hogs. I tell my friends in Canada, I really love you, but you're the tail and we're the dog, okay? And so their hogs are priced off ours. When their dollar weakens, it means that they generate a whole lot more Canadian dollars when they sell pigs, whether they sell them in the United States or whether they sell them in Canada. I mean, it's still just, it's the U.S. price converted to Canadian dollars, and a weak Canadian dollar means you get more dollars. Well, about half of their costs depend on that exchange rate. Okay? Feed mainly. So feed costs go up there when their dollar weakens. But all of their revenues depends on that relationship. So a weaker dollar means Canadians make money hand over fist in the hog business. And being very logical economic agents, they make money hand over fist. What do they want to do? They want to do more of it until they don't make money hand over fist, okay? And that's exactly what happened. The Canadian business grew rapidly, and they started shipping a lot of hogs to the United States. And it was not a happy time. And along came mandatory country boards and labeling, and there was anti-dumping duties back in here in the 2007 and 8 time period for about 2 years, and a lot of measures that were aimed really at stopping Canadian hogs. This one was really duplicitous in my opinion because it caused lots of other problems, but it was meant strictly to stop Canadian hogs. I mean, that was the reason it was put in there. It was put in the dark of night of the 2008 Farm Bill. It's kind of the consolation prize for a few senators for not getting a ban on packer ownership, and it caused a lot of disruption over the years. It was a happy day when we finally, the new MCOOL rule went into effect. We finally repealed it after losing in the World Trade Organization process for challenging trade restrictions, which kind of we told most of us who are against this, said from the beginning that this wasn't going to stand up, and it didn't. And finally we stepped back away from that. But you can see the kind of changes that happened during that time period. Now, the most recent period here, we've seen some growth since we kind of got toward the end of MCOOL, some growth again in the number of weaned pigs coming from Canada. We obviously we're not as dependent on that as we were at one time, and because the dollar has not gotten out of kind of a reasonable kind of relationship. The Canadian dollar's been somewhere around 85 cents to 92 cents for some time period. We don't have a lot of incentives one way or another for them to grow and sell a bunch of pigs into the United States or for them to contract. And so the Canadian breeding herd's been growing by about 1% per year, a little more than 1% per year. And I think we'll probably continue to grow slightly over the next several years. There is a change in laws in Manitoba that just recently they dropped a requirement that they had to put digesters on their manure lagoons, and so there's going to be some growth there because of that, and because the plant at Brandon needs more hogs. They'd like to double shift that at some point. So there will be some growth up there, but I don't think we're going to get a lot more pigs coming south. Now, we had forecast for this year some growth in the number of weaned pigs coming south. That hadn't happened. It's basically level with 2016. And we had also said that toward the end of the year, we're probably going to get some growth in the number of market hogs. We jumped the gun on that one because the Coldwater plant has a lot of pigs that are being provided by its owners that are raised in the United States. When they get closer to full or go to double shift, we think that they will reach into Ontario and buy a decent number of pigs there, because Ontario right now is shipping a lot of hogs to Quebec. They lost a major packer summer before last, and so that's caused some imbalances there. So these things are going to change a bit, but we're not going back to here, I'm pretty sure. We're not going to be that dependent on the Canadian market to supply hogs. They're not going to be that dependent on us to take their hogs. I think we're going to grow these imports slightly over time, but most of our growth will be in the United States. So it's a trade situation that, for many of you in this room, you kind of go, what's the big deal? For a lot of us, this was a huge deal back in the early 2000s. It was a constant battle. We had producers calling into the office that were, especially in western Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, and eastern North Dakota, that would count the trucks with Canadian plates on them coming south. Okay, there were 340, or and one of the points to be made, though, is because of this disruption and reducing this, we lost a packing plant right in there. Sioux City's, the old Morel plant at Sioux City, killed a lot of Canadian hogs. And when MCOOL went into effect and made that a much more difficult thing, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back on that plant. Now, it's been replaced this year with a much better plant, much more in a much better location in Sioux City. And so, but it was a major factor in losing a plant there and causing some disruptions in the short run. So. That's kind of all the comments that I'd prepared. I figured we had some discussion that we could do, and so if you have some questions, let's kind of visit with those. If there's something clearly I've left out, we'll try to figure out how to approach that. Jim?
Yeah. The Smithfield model with ownership in China, has that really increased export, or has it made a difference at all?
The question was the Smithfield model with ownership to China, Chinese ownership, has it increased exports? Has it made a difference at all? I'll let you be the judge of that, Jim. Here's the Chinese export line, okay? It doesn't look like it's made a lot of difference to me at this point yet. Now, that doesn't mean it won't, okay? As I understand, WH Holdings is still trying to blend a lot of the Smithfield branded type products into its business in China and develop that. And if that takes hold, and I've contended from day one on this that it was a move about getting wholesome, safe product to take to China. Okay, there were wild speculation when it first happened. Oh, they're going to move all the hogs to China. Well, I didn't think they were going to do that, but it was about getting wholesome, safe product in a country that had all kinds of food scandals. Okay. And I still think that has some value to it, but I'll put it on. Now, where would exports to China have been without that? They may have been zero. I don't know. You don't know. That's the mystery of the road untraveled. But I think the data say that it hasn't been a huge shot in the arm yet. I still have to think that those kind of close relationships, and especially the Shangwei WH distribution system in China, would be very beneficial for that. So, yeah, Mark.
How does that chart look by value?
By value, Japan is still clearly the number one. Mexico is number two in value. They buy lower dollar product, but a lot more of it. Japan is still clearly number one. And the reason Japan is still clearly number one is they have the gate price system, which means that if you have a container of product and the average price of it is the gate price or above, it comes in at a set tariff. If the average price of that is below the gate price, it's the set tariff plus the difference. Okay? And so you don't bring anything in under the gate price, the container. Now, you'll mix things in that container to get the average. So you may have a lot of tenderloins and a lot of loins and then a few butts and a few bellies or something in there, or picnics to bring the average back down so that it just gets over. But basically, the low-value product market in Japan is pretty much foreclosed to the United States and Canada. And that was going to be the value of the TPP agreement, is over time that was going to basically go down. And so it would open up a larger market for lower value product that we now sell to Mexico and other low-value buyers, China. And so we would have a different competitor for that. So on a value standpoint, Japan is still clearly number one, but you can see we haven't changed the volume going there at all over the years.
What does that chart look like without NAFTA?
Well, we haven't lived without NAFTA yet, so I don't know. You've got zero tariffs for Canada and Mexico since 2012, I believe. Okay. All right. So it doesn't look near this good. I don't know what it looks like, Mark. I don't know how you project that. Now, you know, Dermot Hayes has done some projections for MPPC, but to have sizable reductions in this. I always make the point, you know, in the short run, you're not going to see the volume of product to Mexico go down much. And the reason is they need the product. Okay? If we start, you know, if they decide to put tariffs on, they're still going to buy it. But they're going to deduct the tariff out of the price that they'll pay. And so you're going to see an impact on our revenues, even if we're shipping product down there. And longer term, you know, there's going to be other people that supply them that will be able to supply them at a lower net price because they won't have a tariff on. And the first ones in line on that will be the Canadians. Even with the locational differential, they'll have some advantage there. The Brazilians will have some advantage as well. Yeah.
I'd like for you to comment on negotiated hogs, the way that's decreased, and your opinion on hog futures.
Okay, separate topic completely, not related to this, right? Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and take that as we're going. The question was about the decline in negotiated hogs. Number one, the good news is it's probably not going to decline very much more because it's that close to zero. Okay? So can't go below zero, so I think that's the good news. We averaged about 2.8% negotiated hogs this year. That's probably going to stay about the same. Might increase some. We've tried a lot of different things to try to get more hogs in the negotiated category. We even changed the rules last time to say, okay, there's some hogs being negotiated that they don't actually arrive at a price. They just arrive at how a price is going to be, and we're going to call those negotiated formula hogs so we can put them over there. And the problem is that hardly any day is there more than 2 packers that do those, and so we don't get any data on them. They're not published. It happens some, but it's not significant. There are a lot of theories about this, but I think the real theory, is that negotiating hogs is a costly process. It costs you time. It costs you money. It costs, you have to invest effort into it. Many people look at it and go, why don't I just use what he negotiates and just add $1? And that doesn't cost hardly anything. And so because of that, more and more people have formulated hogs. Now, one of the reasons that that's happened is that our data that we get from the mandatory price reporting system is so good. I mean, it's everything, and it's auditable, and USDA goes and audits the packers to make sure that it's accurate. And so if you've got really good data, you will formulate prices off from it. If you didn't have good data, you'd go, I don't think I trust that, so I better negotiate. So the irony of this is we came in with this data system that generated all this good data, and the negotiations have kept going down. And I still think it's because it's a costly effort, all right? It's not because packers don't want to buy hogs on the negotiated market. Right, Mike? Packers would be glad to negotiate hogs, okay? The reason here is producers don't want to do it and haven't wanted to do it. And they keep seeing, and they keep looking at it going, boy, that's getting pretty low. Somebody ought to do something about that. And you say, well, why don't you negotiate? Oh, well, I'm not going to. It costs too much money. It takes too much time, Well, if you don't do it, then nobody is. we're trying something. We think at this point that it's been, a lot of people are so far removed they don't know kind of how to go about it. And so we've talked to the pork board and some others, some other groups have talked to the pork board about doing an education program. And we had, and this gets into the stickiness of this whole deal. We were going to have a meeting back in, when was that, August, September? And we're going to have some packers come and talk to people and kind of some guys that are negotiating hogs say, well, here's how I do it and here's kind of where I start and how I go about this. And then the attorneys heard about it, okay? Which attorneys, you know, they spend 4 years studying to say no, all right? I don't know if they learn anything else, but they're real good at that. Any attorneys here? Okay. I'm right, aren't I? Yeah, he agrees. Okay. And for good reason, okay? This was treading, and one problem was they had multiple packers that were going to help them, and you know, when they said, oh, we're going to have these packers come and all talk to us at once, and I said, yeah, you're not going to have, that ain't going to happen. And sure enough, it wasn't going to happen. But the other one was we had a bunch of producers talking about how to go about pricing hogs. And the producer said, well, we're just trying to help each other out. And I said, okay, let's say we had the 10 largest packers decide that they're going to get together and help each other talk about how to price hogs. You think that'd be good? Well, no. And I said, well, then why would it be good for you to do that from an antitrust standpoint, okay? So I understand why it happened, you know, but there's no reason that we can't do some education program and deliver it to individual producers in the comfort of their own office, okay, where they're not colluding, they're not getting together. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and so we're exploring doing that to try to help people just learn how to go about it. Will that work? I'm a skeptic because I think there's good economic reasons that things happen, all right? And in this case, I'm drawn back, Lowell, to the tragedy of the commons. I keep asking Dr. Lowell Catlett here. I know he's an economist by training, and the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons was in England when they had common pastures. And you could bring your sheep and run on the anybody could bring their sheep and run on the common pastures. But nobody owned the pasture. So guess what the pasture looked like all the time? Nobody had any incentive to maintain this thing or to conserve it. It was just eat everything that's there. All right? So it looked like a pool table all the time. Well, you got the same thing in this one, I think, is that you have a public data item that nobody gets paid to produce and nobody has to pay to use. And so we have too little of it produced and too much of it used. And all of a sudden, you know, there's none out here. There's, you know, the only reason to do it is if you enjoy doing it, if you think you might get a higher price, or if you're altruistic. All right. I'll put stock in the first two, but in the long run, I won't put much profit in the altruism part. All right. So I don't know how, you know, you can solve that. It's not an easy. It's kind of it's a hard situation to solve, but it is a public goods issue and a tragedy of the commons that we have this happening. And now the question is, what do you do with it there? And for instance, you know, I'm going to encourage you to go negotiated hogs when negotiated hogs have been $6 to $8 less than any other hog purchase method over the last 2 months. Yeah. Anybody want to volunteer for that duty? No. You get to lead us right toward that tank. Okay. Yeah. All right. So it's a tough question, and so what are the alternatives? Well, one of the reasons we went to USDA on the last, not the last, but the time before reauthorization of pork mandatory price supporting, and asked them to add pork, and the packers were on board with adding pork to the mandatory price supporting system. And one of the reasons the producers were interested was to get a broader, better reported pork trade so that we had a more representative estimated cutout value. Okay, so I think that's a decent alternative. You know, you're not going to get 100% of the cutout value. You're going to have to negotiate that percentage with your packer. But basing your price off the cutout value, to me, is a very good alternative to this. You know, there's no, you know, obviously, you know, when we get in a situation where we have plenty of hogs relative to packing capacity, there's pressure on the negotiated market because that's the residual supply. Next summer, when we don't have enough hogs relative to packing capacity, the guy on the residual supply makes more money than anybody else. So you get to be a wildcat oil explorer, I guess.